Nothing that happened in art was so unprecedented, and nothing is still so enigmatic as the fact that an eccentric Londoner of 68 called J.M.W. Turner, often mocked but grudgingly recognized as a great man, exhibited two pictures that he called Shade and Darkness and Light and Color. It was an astonishing innovation. A claim that the significance of painting was the colour and tone of the paint. Such titles were an open admission that the painter suffered from what his critics called chromomania. They showed that the painter was indeed mad about colour, and far worse than that, because the British never mind a madman, he was serious about colour. Turner's decision that his pictures should be based in colour came when he painted Ulysses deriding Polyphemus. He was 55. When Ulysses was exhibited, it appeared that it was the brightness of colour that the hero was being so defiant about, and it was just that which the public resented, as colouring run mad. Positive vermilion, the reviewer went on, positive indigo, and all the most glaring tints of green, yellow and purple contend for the mastery of the canvas. The colour of Ulysses in fact communicated an exclusive commitment, which is always provoking, and a mastery of management. The geometry of the sunrise and the vapour through which it rises is modern observation of Turner's own. It was far from descriptive. No one could forget that the picture looked like paint. The colour and the paint were realities in themselves. The gold sail was spread against the airy lilac cloud. The galley's shaded side reflected the Cyclopean furnace. The phosphorescence that naturalists had lately observed in the agitation of southern waters was personified in sea nymphs. The Cyclops reclining on his volcanic couch embodies natural forces. Turner's discovery of the inherent force of colour was like the invention of the internal combustion engine. The ultimate effect of such discoveries is that posterity has to live with the din of racing pictures. intensity of colour that transcended description reached its extreme in the picture Slavers Throwing Overboard the Dead and Dying. The captain had ordered that these slaves suffering from an epidemic should be thrown overboard so that insurance compensation could be claimed for their violent deaths at sea. It was a favourite subject of humanitarian protest. The question of whether this theme appealed more to the colourist or the moralist in Turner is unanswerable and irrelevant if indignation and enjoyment can reinforce one another. It is certain that indignation was the less urgent of the two motives. When Turner made an example of the atrocity, it was 57 years since the event. John Ruskin, whose father gave him the picture, considered this the noblest sea that Turner has ever painted, and if so, the noblest certainly ever painted by man. Yet he was to say after 25 years that he found it too painful to live with. In 1841, Sir David Wilkie, Turner's former rival and his friend, until the luminosity of Turner's later pictures outshone the blackness and the dullness of his, died and was buried at sea. This memorial picture, exhibited the following year, had significant overtones. It was a tribute to fame and friendship. A follower remonstrated about the unnatural blackness of the sails, and Turner, whose response was always defiant, replied, "I only wish I had any colour to make them blacker." The wish for colour that was blacker than black showed Turner's understanding of requirements that had nothing to do with representation. This seemingly excessive blackness suggests the symbolism of a ship of death, but it also draws our attention to the surface of the picture rather than to the depth of pictorial illusion. The horizon is crossed and cancelled by vertical reflections. Then the uprights are themselves crossed by the angle of the ripples, the slightly steeper drift of the smoke, and steeper still, the two jib sails which fly off the bowsprit. This pattern is continuously surprising precisely because we're not allowed to account for it in terms of depth and illusion, but must read it as a structure on the picture surface itself. The surface is the new joker in the pack of pictorial effects which Turner made his own. The consistent streakiness of the paint itself was only paralleled by the new consistencies of painting in the age to come. Turner's idea of what the painting needed was a modern idea. Canvas and colour have needs only when a painter sees the requirement of developing shapes, as modern painters do. It's not easy to grasp this prodigious yet reticent man who painted his last self-portrait at the age of 23. He's not only too various in his achievements. There are 528 finished and unfinished oil paintings and over 19,000 drawings. He is simply too large, with a grasp of the senses of humankind that is almost incomparable among Englishmen, except for the man who, by the kind of coincidence that puzzles everyone but astrologers, was born on the same day of the year, William Shakespeare. It's hard to grasp Turner's achievement because of its scale. Some of his greatest admirers thought his work an invitation to megalomania. But Turner didn't paint large pictures. He simply painted pictures of largeness. At the age of 19, he was at Tintern Abbey in Monmouthshire. His basic trade was a modest and useful one. He was trained as a topographical draftsman. Apparently a limited craft. But only a draftsman could equip you to envisage and transmit the appearance of somewhere or something. Cherish it, improve it, buy it or sell it, understand it. The great ruin concerned his times because curiosity about the Middle Ages was at the heart of the progressive spirit that we now call romantic. Turner was serious about his craft. He was no less serious about the past, its achievement and its dream. Serious, in fact, about the intimations of greatness that could be transferred from building to paper. He had a salutary awareness of what it was to be dwarfed by all this, so serious that it already amounted to genius. It led him to the terrific element which he was to paint all his life with awe and rapture. It led him to the sea. Turner's first encounter with the sea was on his way to sketch in the Isle of Wight when he was 20. He turned it into the first oil painting that he ever showed at the Royal Academy. He painted the wave and the web of foam drawn back in its hollow. The disoriented pitching of the boat that rowed it. He painted the needles behind. Turner's meeting with the sea was the most sudden and overwhelming involvement in painting. Look at Turner again at 28. He had all the same qualities, but transformed by the success that he was destined for. He had been elected a full academician, and what meant more, he'd been abroad for the first time. He crossed to France by the Channel packet, which put the travellers into a boat to get them ashore. The close acquaintance with the sea, nearly swamped, Turner noted, meant as much to him as any part of the journey. In the picture he called Calais Pier, the grandeur of sea painting was transformed by his experience, not only of the sea, but of paint. He sought a likeness with the medium that was to be as ungovernable as the sea itself. The conventional code of representation was breaking down under Turner's relentless pressure. The whole condition of painting was in question. It had been founded on the axiom, as Fuseli put it, that the less the traces appear of the means by which a work has been produced, the more it resembles the operations of nature. But the traces of Turner's means were now unconcealed. He was applying paint more and more freely with a knife, and he was much criticized. His sea was said to look like soap and chalk. It's the scribbling of painting, someone said. So much of the trowel, so mortary. Turner now wanted painting to resemble itself before anything else. The operations portrayed were first and foremost the painter's. Yet the peril of the sea enthralled him. For an islander, it was the medium of life, the highway to the great tradition of art and to the grandeur of his subject. I think that Turner's painting had a lifelong theme. It was apparent in the stone cage which the ribs of Tintern Abbey made against the sky. It was apparent in the risk of fishermen at sea on Calais Pier. He was inescapably involved in the material of the world. He was in it up to the neck. His other commitment was to the space and the light that were the greatness of landscape. In the Alps, he had seen the peaks of natural sublimity. This is Mer de Glace, the Sea of Ice. In Paris, he'd seen the summits of European art, the masterpieces looted by Napoleon. He put the experiences of nature and art together and made more of the conjunction than anyone could have foreseen. At the age of 44 in 1819, he made his first Italian tour. He visited Venice, the city he was to go to again and again, the birthplace and the theatre of colour. It was no slight undertaking to see sunrise in Venice. At daybreak he looked across the lagoon, eastward, past the chain of islands. Looking straight into the watery sunrise, he noticed that the pearly shadows, tone and semitone in order, receded into the distance as clearly as a scale in music. In his watercolours, Turner was recording with the greatest delicacy and precision the perspective of tones which create the space and light of painting. In the cool Venetian dawn, he was drawing two of the vital elements of all painting, direct from nature. The scale of foreign travel and in the conditions of the time, its hazards were exhilarating to him. In January, his party reached the Alps when the snow was already falling, and they were warned against attempting to cross. But Turner was always in a hurry, and they set out for the high pass of Mont Cenis. At the top, the carriage door was frozen shut and the travellers were forced to crawl out of the window. Their guide and the officer for the road began to fight, and Turner was compelled to flounder through the snow on foot to Lorneburg. 9 years later, again in the depths of winter, Turner set out for the same high pass. He painted and wrote about that journey. The coach slid about in all directions and zizzed into a ditch. We bivouacked in the snow with fires lighted for 3 hours while the diligence was righted and dug out. It took 6 oxen to drag it upright. More than one of his most deeply felt pictures originated in real danger, in which he took a sardonic delight. Nothing in all the dramas of romantic painting was so real and of so much actual consequence to painter and painting as this. The rest of Romanticism was by comparison a fancy dress masquerade. A courage that was perhaps foolhardy, perhaps heroic, but also a genuine courage in the venture of his art was a part of Turner's method. This picture was entitled Snowstorm, a theme that he returned to 3 times over 30 years, for the last time in 1842, when he was 67. Snowstorm. Steamboat off a harbour's mouth, making signals in shallow water and going by the lead. The author, the title concluded, was in this storm on the night the Ariel left Harwich. When a friendly visitor to his gallery told Turner that his mother had liked the picture, Turner snubbed him and gave us precious information. I didn't paint it to be understood, but I wished to show what such a scene was like. I got the sailors to lash me to the mast to observe it. I was lashed for 4 hours, and I didn't expect to escape, but I felt bound to record it if I did. No one has any business to like the picture. His curmudgeonly rudeness was possibly a kind of loyalty. Loyalty to the experience, to the sea, and the fear of it, and also to his own vocation. His imagination was convulsed with the reality. The beating of the paddle wheel churns the picture into its pitching centrifugal shape. Turner was, without any doubt, the greatest inventor of picture form who ever touched the art of landscape. Sometimes, remembering the tempest which blows across the Sistine ceiling, one thinks of Turner as the Michelangelo of landscape. He brooded on a critic's description of the painter's soapsuds and whitewash. I wonder what they think the sea's like. I wish they'd been in it. Snowstorm Steamboat is a picture of being in it. The picture was the token of his endurance and defiance. Looking at Snowstorm, we lose our bearings with the ship. When Turner was 68, shade and darkness, and light and colour, portrayed the movement of pictorial process with an extraordinary energy. Shade and Darkness carried a subtitle, The Evening of the Deluge, and beyond the sweeping curtains of rain, a Noah's Ark is beached at the exact centre of the square canvas. In the foreground, there are tumble-down shelters and benighted creatures who will never get on board. In Light and Colour, subtitled The Morning After the Deluge, the presiding genius, identified by Turner himself as Moses, is less like the prophet of tradition writing the book of Genesis than like the painter himself, ordaining a highly original creation. This creation revolves round the image of a serpent, raised in the wilderness on the staff of Moses. But the symbol of the serpent is ambiguous. As a symbol of evil, common to Scripture and to Turner, it warns us to expect no favourable outcome. The red and yellow morning is filled with the debris of the cataclysm. Floating figures, bubbles of hope. Each in prismatic guise, as Turner wrote, ephemeral as the summer fly which rises, flits, expands and dies. The thin curving strokes of colour that trace paths of sight and mark visual connections seem entirely functional and credible in our time, but they're quite unlike any painting in the 19th century or before it. The second subtitle, Goethe's Theory, was taken seriously in 1843. It was the clue to the opposition between Turner's two pictures, and a sign that it had a rational underpinning in the most reputable philosophy of colour of his time. Goethe divided his colour circle into two halves. Yellow, orange and red were called the plus colours. The feelings they excite, Goethe wrote, are quick, lively, aspiring. On the other side were the minus colours, blue-green, blue and purple, producing a restless, susceptible, anxious impression. In the evening, the mixture of pigments, or gross material colour, as Turner called them, makes darkness. In light and colour, the vortex into which colours are whirling in the morning is the mixture of light, which Turner called the pure combination of aerial colours. Light was his abiding faith. And when he was 71, he personified it in a last tremendous figure, the angel standing in the sun. The sun and the angel were now carnivorous, devouring everything. In the catalogue, he quoted from the Book of Revelations to summon voracious birds. "Come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of kings and the flesh of captains and the flesh of mighty men." Beneath the angel with uplifted sword, Turner assembles figures from Scripture who have in common only the violence of their stories. Adam and Eve with their murdered son, Judith with her decapitated lover, Delilah and the stricken Samson, all are driven by an exultant skeleton past a serpent that is chained by the angel in the Book of Revelations, not forever, but for 1,000 years. Turner's love of light had generated this merciless imagining. Turner's intuition about natural forces was hidden from his time, but his brooding on the irresistible apocalypse of radiation has become familiar to us. At the very beginning of his colour studies, he'd noted an Italian source that described light as an emanation of the deity. Ruskin reported that at the end of his life, he said that the sun was God. His involvement was absolute. He really was worshipping the light that gives and takes away. The flood of radiance and the flux of colour were both overwhelming. Turner's view was unsparing. It consumed and it enlivened the whole world.